Hello, world history students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Chapter 6, Ancient Rome, Section 2, From Republic to Empire. So, number one, leaders of the late Roman Republic faced numerous problems, such as responsibilities of ruling their vast holdings that stretched the Roman political system to its limits and increased social unrest. And as a result of that, there were a lot of problems with Roman expansion. You're not going to need to write these down, but pay attention here. The government, for the most part, the power of the Senate had increased. There was a lot of aristocrats who were ruling, primarily in the Senate. You had basically less government influence as far as army finance and less government influence as far as foreign affairs. Your provinces, this would be your outlining areas of the Republic, there was poverty. The people that lived there weren't given citizenship. They were treated like a colony, and the Roman government, those folks in the Senate, appointed their governors. So they didn't have a say about who was ruling over them. You had problems with agriculture. A lot of our small farmers were moving to the cities. The government leased new farmland only to those who were very wealthy. Hence, our ordinary small farmers weren't able to compete, and hence they were forced out and thus moved to the cities. As a result, we had a decrease in agricultural production. And there was also a decrease in manufacturing because the Republic became more reliant on imports from other places. Growth in commerce. There was trade, but there were a lot of contracts for public works. And as a result of that, there were some issues about what was happening as far as the spending of money to build all of these projects. And as a result, we're going to have to become more reliant on taxation. And hence, there was a lot of taxation on agriculture. There was looting as a result of war. And yes, there was war that was happening within this empire or this republic, and hence that put a strain on people. The decline of morals. There was an increase in slavery. There was joblessness. And as a result of joblessness, it weakened the ideals of discipline and devotion to the state. Hence, people were becoming really lax in their attitudes. And men were only judged by their wealth, not necessarily by their character. So we have a variety of different rulers that came to power. Some of them were a little more democratic than others. And we're going to start with the Gracchi brothers, or the Gracchus brothers, as you might hear them called. We have Tiberius and Gaius. These two men ruled at different times, but they were brothers, and they were concerned that after years of fighting in the Roman legion, a lot of our soldier farmers, the men who had been farmers for the majority of the year and took time off to fight for the republic, had been reduced to poverty because their farms had been sold to repay the debts. Hey, if they weren't able to harvest their crops, they weren't able to sell their grain, and hence they lost their farms. And there was a great concern about that. The Gracchis supported redistribution of public lands to these smaller farmers, and as a result, the Roman elite, with a lot of the support of the Senate, plotted and assassinated both of them at various times, not at the same time. There was Gaius Marius, who improved the recruitment for the army by eliminating the property restrictions that had been there for years and accepted anyone into the military. What ends up happening is now we're going to take a lot of our leadership cues from the military opposed to our government officials. Gaius Marius is also the uncle of Julius Caesar. There was a social war because of the Rome's Italian allies fighting for citizenship. We had some issues happening within the Republic, and in time, Italians were defeated, but the Senate still granted them their citizenship. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who at times butted head with Marius, he became the consul in the year 88 BC. Marius and his supporters tried to prevent Sulla from taking military command. Sulla responded by marching on Rome, and he was victorious, and he became dictator and executed anyone who opposed him. In time, he is going to leave power. And that leads us to a period of time where we had to find a new council. And what ends up happening is we have the triumvirate, which is a panel of people, kind of like an oligarchy in a sense. We have Caesar, Pompeius, and Crassus, who all become kind of the panel of leaders. And supposedly they would enter power together and exit power together, kind of as a team. So this first triumvirate consisted of Julius Caesar, who was a great soldier at that time, Gnaeus Pompeius, or sometimes known as Gnaeus Pompey, Licinius, Crassus. Crassus dies. And as a result, we're going to have kind of a war that's going to happen between Pompey and Caesar. And Pompey orders Caesar to back down. Caesar is coming off a very victorious campaign. He spent basically a decade gaining land for the Republic. He basically was able to conquer areas of Denmark and Germany and France. And so he had a lot of popularity. And he comes back towards Rome, and he's told by Pompey not to fight him. And he crosses a river called the Rubicon. And in a sense, that's like the line in the sand. If you cross that, that means civil war. And Caesar and his men, they cross this little river, which really doesn't amount to all that much, but it signifies a very significant event. Okay, so they face off in what would become a civil war. And eventually, Pompeius is murdered, and Caesar will win. Caesar travels in this time to places like Egypt, and he reports back to the Senate that he basically did the Veni Vidi Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Also becomes very friendly with Cleopatra and starts a relationship with her where they have a child together. But needless to say, Caesar was popular, and he was popular with the public. He gave them the people citizenship, especially to those in the provinces. He also gave land to the poor, and he's going to develop some enemies, primarily enemies within the Senate, who plotted to murder him on what is called the Ides of March. Ides is another name for middle, and hence the date is March 15th. In an attempt to save the Republic, they thought by getting rid of Caesar, they could save face. Okay, so some of Caesar's accomplishments: he did grant citizenship to the province. He instituted the Julian calendar, which was 365 and a quarter days. He replaced dishonest governors. He began a number of public works projects like canals, public libraries, drainage marshes. He also reorganized city government, and hence he made enemies, where he would be assassinated by a group of senators led by Cassius and Brutus in this bloody event known as the Ides of March. After he's gone, we need a new form of government. And so we have the second triumvirate. Caesar's adopted son, Octavian, would be one of those men. His loyal officer, Mark Antony, would be also there. And then the high priest, Lepidus. They all form this new triumvirate, got along just for a short period of time, and eventually we're going to have a breakdown again. Okay, Mark Antony would rule the West. So if you look down at the map below, the areas that are kind of red, that would be his area. Mark Antony, for the most part, also counseled Cleopatra, and they became an item, if you want to call it that. Civil war eventually broke out, resulting between Mark Antony and Octavian. This was upon the death of Lepidus. But needless to say, what's going to end up happening is in Egypt, Mark Antony is going to be defeated at the Battle of Actium. And what ends up happening is kind of the tale of a Shakespearean drama. Supposedly, Mark Antony, his death is reported to Cleopatra before it actually occurs, and Cleopatra is so distraught, she takes her own life. Mark Antony hears that Cleopatra has died. He takes his life in what is a double suicide. So Octavian did not return to the old republic because he felt like government could be more effective if he held the power, hence the idea of becoming an emperor. And so he is given the title Augustus, which means the revered one, hence emperor of Rome. And hence Rome goes from a republic to an empire as a result of that. So looking at our empire, kind of at its peak around the year 117, this would have been after the death of Octavian or Augustus Caesar, but it covers a pretty good chunk of land surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, good chunk of Europe, a little bit of Asia Minor and the Middle East and parts of North Africa. So the Julian Claudian emperors, they differed from the Flavians in that the Julian Claudians were ancestors of Julius Caesar. That would include Augustus and Tiberius Augustus. They were very competent. But you also had Caligula and Nero, who were not. So you kind of had some good and bad of the Julio-Claudians. The Flavians, they came to power in 68 and returned Rome to a more stable empire. And there wasn't as much drama tied to the Flavians. Anyway, the Roman Empire was held together during the Pax Romana. Pax Romana is Roman peace because of its stable government, law, widespread trade, and also peace. Provincial citizens were protected from unfair decisions by their governors because any citizen could appeal an unfair treatment directly to the emperor. Landowners were able to produce surpluses for trade without using slaves because they used tenant farmers who paid the owners for the use of land with a certain amount of crops or that they harvested. Trade with Alexandria was particularly important because the Egyptians produced grain surpluses, which the emperors used to feed Rome's urban population. Thank you very much.